If you happen to have a copy of my book, Learn Functional Programming the Fast Way, you'll know that it has 51 chapters and also has 2 bonus chapters, so 53 total. And as this video series is based on the book, we're currently on chapter 46 of the book. And I mention that because if you just think that the book has 51 chapters and we're on number 46, that gives you a really good idea of how close we are to the finish line right now. And as I note here in the book, as we approach that finish line, our next task is going to be to replace all of the try instances in the to-do list application with either instances. And in the book, I note that I don't think it's really worth doing all of that. And instead, what I'm going to do is start replacing them in the database class. And from there, I think you can imagine what that will look like in the rest of the application, or how that will affect the rest of the application. So to do that, I'm going to slide this over a little bit right there. And then I'll come up here, and just to make sure I get rid of all those try successes and failures, I will delete them up there. And we just need to keep that using. And as I save that, also down here, I have a compilation going. So I'm using Scala CLI and I'm compiling that with the watch option. So that's going to continuously compile the code as I'm working along here. So you can see here, the first error is with the insert function. And so I need to change that to an either. And the thing about either is that it takes 2 parameters instead of 1. So unit was what we decided earlier was going to be our success value. And so we keep that on the right side of the either. And then we put the failure value on the left. And as I show down here, by default, that failure value is going to be a throwable. So I'll just make that one a throwable right there. Then I'll hop down to delete. And again, we'll change that. And you can see this is pretty much a 1-for-1 replacement here. So change that and that. And as I save that, we'll see the errors here. So then we come up to select all. That one's going to be an either. And this one is a little more interesting because the success value is a little more complicated here. The success value is a sequence of strings. But still, all we do is put the throwable in the left position, and then we have that sequence of strings in the right position. And maybe one thing you can see from this is that either is more explicit than try, where try was just showing the success value here. Either is showing the error value over here. And again, I'm just making these throwable, but I mentioned in the book, and I've mentioned before in this course, this value in the left position could be anything. It could be a string or an enumeration or anything in the Scala universe that makes sense right here. So let's save that and see how we're doing. And now we can see that all these file-related functions are failing, and I suspect that's what's going on underneath here, right in that write to file. So you can see how one thing leads to another. So now I need to make this an either, and again, make that a throwable. And write to file returns a try. We'll make that an either. And again, a throwable. And again, just to make sure I get rid of all those, I just want to clean up that code right there. And save that. And I forgot about this. This is a good point. The using control structure returns a try by default. So what we have to do here is say, I want to convert that to an either. And so we can just do that. And then like that. Let me save that. And there we go. The types are telling us that the file utilities are now working. And now I come back to the database utilities and we can see that they're working over here as well. And now if I look down here, I can see that the input processor is failing, which is to be expected because it's expecting a try. You can see here it's requiring a try and it's finding an either, and that's when it's calling db.delete. So that's to be expected right there. And I didn't plan on coming this far, but let's go ahead and just try to fix all these over here and see if we can get everything working. So I don't need any of those up there anymore, so we'll delete that. And now we have try. I'm going to replace that with either. And again, that's just a throwable right there. And you can see this is pretty much just a 1-for-1 replacement here. And since I'm showing the type here, I need to change that to an either. If I wasn't showing a type here, like if I deleted that and I wasn't showing a type, I wouldn't have to do anything. But because I am showing the type, I do need to do that. Come down to this function. That's an either. And throwable. And another either. And I'm just going to keep walking through replacing these types at the moment. And to see a couple other things I want to fix inside the code first. So let us make that an either. And then instead of a success, this one will be a right. And this one will be a left. And similarly here was a try, and now it's an either, like that. A couple more to change up here. So instead of success, it's a right, and failure, that's a left. And you may have noticed that I was skipping past all of these try constructors, and that's because I wanted to run a quick little test just to see if either still worked the way I thought it did. And it does. So what you cannot do here is you can't do that. That doesn't work. Either doesn't have the same construct or construction ability that try does. And instead, what you have to do with either is you can come up here and include that right there. And then we'll come down to here. So instead of doing that right there, we can do an all catch and then say either right there. So that should be a 1-for-1 replacement with try. And again, do that right there. If I didn't miss any, let me save that and see where we are. And show help is probably failing because it's returning a try, and we're expecting either, so we can go fix that. And maybe dot get. Get is not a member either. No, it isn't. So I will come back and fix that one. Since I'm going through the whole application, let me go over and start working on show help over here. So again, anywhere we see the try constructor, we can replace it with that, and that, and that. And then over here, we just replace that with an either. And this is just copy and paste stuff, so I may speed up this video a little bit so you don't have to watch me type. And here, as I come back to this code many days later, what I had up here before was a try, so this was a try constructor. And I was calling get here to return an int there, and if that failed, it was going to throw an exception, which would be caught by try. But what's going on here with either? Let me explain what I'm looking at. So this function is supposed to return an either of throwable and int right there. And you can see that's the exact type we already have in this code right here. So we should be able to delete that and delete that. And in fact, I could delete all of this code right here and just return db.delete, but I'm not going to do that. And I'll just say we just want to yield maybe count out of this function. And when I say that, we should see that error message go away because this type right here is exactly the same as that type right there. So what I was doing earlier when I had .get here, that was an artifact of working with try. But as we're working with either, we don't need to do that. And as I mentioned, if you want this code shortened, you can get rid of that, and you can also get rid of that. And that could be the function right there. So I'll go ahead and save that just to give us something different. And now if you look up here, all of our files look like they're compiling well. And you can see that the to-do list is not looking well. So if I come down here, we will see errors in the to-do list. And as expected, it says it's looking for a try, or it's expecting a try, and it's requiring an either, actually vice versa. So it's finding a try and it's requiring an either. So I just need to come back up here and let's get rid of that try. And get rid of that try right there. And since I'm showing the types, I'll replace that with either and throwable. And that looks good up here, but I still have an error down here. And actually, we are fine. I was looking at that wrong. I was seeing these errors here, and I didn't know exactly what was going on. But the project actually was compiling successfully in these lines right here. So I just restarted that. You can see that we don't have any error messages. So now if I stop that, then we should be able to say Scala CLI and just dot to run the project in the current directory. And we can view the tasks. There's one task, go into the office. And then we could say make coffee. And just to make sure that's working, we'll delete that one. So everything looks like it's working well. Of course, I'm not testing this very well, but that's not the purpose of what I'm doing. The purpose was to show how to change all of these tries to eithers. And if I review this, you can see that I started in the database class and I just started replacing these tries with eithers and just replace them almost one for one in most situations. And the biggest thing I had to do was just add the left parameter for all of these. And by default, they're all throwable. So that's what I was going with here. And as I've kind of mentioned, in the real world, these won't always necessarily be throwable. You may want to use strings here, or you may want to use an enumeration or some other type here to give callers of your function more information about what really happened. Having looked at that, let's come over to the book and see what else I had in here. So in the book here, I covered either, and I showed again the possible error in an either is in the left position, the success value is in the right. And then I went in and I changed write to file, I changed select all, I changed the delete function. And then in the book, I stopped there, but in the code over here, I changed everything. And you got to see all those changes. And then I note down here the keys in this process of switching to try and either. I think one is that the signatures are a little longer to read, but they're also more explicit and they're also more flexible. And that's really important in the long run. When you look at this over here and this left value can be anything you want, that's much more flexible than try because try only returns a throwable. And as I've mentioned here, we could have returned a string, enum, or any other type in this left position, but I'm not going through all that in this course because we'll see more types here in just a little while. And the most important part is listed right here is that this flexibility that I'm talking about is really important for where we're going next. So that's the reason I switched from try to either. So I want to start getting used to seeing multiple types inside of these brackets here, and also the flexibility of what we can contain within these brackets, these types that we can contain in the brackets.